Welcome to this walkthrough on MPM fluids within Bifrost. Within Bifrost we've got the MPM suite. Now within that we can use MPM cloth, MPM rubber, MPM gel, MPM fluids, snow, sand. It's incredible. There's an amazing family of sort of granular based particles in Bifrost, but you don't always have to just use them at face value. What do I mean by that? Well, MPM fluids, for example, we would usually mesh those and create something like water or any other kind of liquid. However, today we're just going to be using the particles themselves. Why? Well, because we can get a huge amount of particles into Maya without much of a computational overhead, just by taking a few simple steps. So we're going to be creating these fluid-like morphing fish, just as an example, and it's a fairly simple idea. So hopefully you'll be able to take this away and create something similar yourself and learn something from it. So let's get into it. So today we're going to be going through MPM fluids. Now what's cool about MPM fluids is that we can get like a really high particle count, some really sort of detailed particles going on in our scenes without having to use standard particles. Let me just drag in the graph here. Now I'll just sort of show you around the scene what I've got going on. So I'm just going to switch on my shark. So all this is a shark that I've brought in from the content browser. As you can see in here, if you open up content browsers, there's various animals. And I've simply animated it with some bend deformers. And yeah, just offset a little bit so we get a little bit of extra swing to the end of the tail there. Just sort of some after swim. So I've got a shark and then I've got a dolphin, which is down here, doing its thing, and everything is kind of like constant in terms of animation. You don't have to use this. Obviously you could use anything you want. You could, use characters or text or anything really, shapes. And then I've got a whale. And so we go from the shark to the dolphin to the whale as seen in the example. Something I should mention here is that when you've created your model, because we're going to be using these as colliders in the graph, you want to reverse your normals. And so quite simply, mesh display, reverse normals. Okay, that's just so that the surface is pointing inwards, and so we get a collision from inside the object. So I'll just switch. Actually, I'll keep these on for a minute. I'll just put them all as templates. And then we've got our emitters. Now the emitters are quite simply just 3 separate emitters, okay? And we're going to be using those separately. They've got a little extrusion on them, and I've just kind of bent them to sort of fit the belly of these fish. And that's about it really. So I guess the first thing we could do is bring our emitters in and create a graph. So let's just open this up, create graph. And I'm going to bring in emitter 1, emitter 2, and emitter 3. You should obviously name these. I haven't. And let's just kind of line all of these up over here. And then we're going to create our MPM fluids. Let's just get in a MPM gel setup. And then we can delete the gel. So let's just go right click, explode on here. And then we're just going to delete this gel node, and we've got our solver and whatever else, simulate MPM and collider as part of all of that. And so now I'll just hit tab and start typing in source MPM fluid, and I can just start to plug it into this solver setup here. There isn't one set up for the fluid, but if we wanted to create a fluid setup like we just saw with the gel setup, we can actually, once we've got that source plugged in, we can select all of these, and we will go create compound, and I will call this MPM underscore fluids set up, like so, and then I will publish that as MPM fluid setup, publish. And then when we type that next time, fluids, MPM fluids setup, we can right click and hit explode, and then we've got the MPM fluid. So we never have to do that again, which is really cool. Right, so I'm going to need 3 fluids, but I'm going to start with 1 fluid, okay? So let's move these guys up. Let's get our first fluid going. We've got our output here. Plug that in, rewind, and we're going to need to make a few changes straight off the bat. So we want to use an end frame. So for the example, I think I went to kind of frame 80. So 1 to frame 80. We've got a volume distribution, which is good. I'm going to crank this particles per voxel up to about 48, just so we get more particles for every voxel. It just makes our sim look a little bit more detailed. Vibration speed is going to slow us down. It's going to give us some more realistic movement to water. But for what we're doing here with particles, I'm going to put this down to about 15 and things will be pretty fast. Initial speed and direction, I'm going to leave that for now. I'm going to come back to that. And with viscoelasticity, we'll leave that at the moment because we're just not going to play it and really sort of see what we got. But we are going to use this. It's kind of like helps the fluid return back to a certain shape again, and we're going to use that in conjunction with surface tension and some viscosity, because we're not, I mean, my particular example isn't like pure water fluids, okay? So I just wanted something slightly different. So if I just pull back here and start to play, we're not going to see a lot happen apart from some fluids turn up and drop to the floor, because we haven't initiated any colliders as such as yet. So we need to bring those guys in now. And I'm going to create 3 colliders. So Control C, Control V, Control V. So we've got 3 colliders now, and we'll just plug those into the collider port. Like so. So we've got 3 colliders. And now we need our fish, our dolphin and whatnot. So I'm going to bring in, the first one's going to be the shark. I haven't named my group to shark. That's a bit naughty. So we're going to bring in our shark. That's going to be the first one. So just middle mouse, drag that into the graph. It just pulls the graph for a minute, control and period. So going to go to the dolphin next, will be the next one. Let's just drag that in, put it over the top of this one for a second, and then we're going to do the whale, and I'm just going to drag that in over here. Okay, so we've got a geometry. Let's just go in here and start plugging them in. So first, second, third. So here's where we need to think about the timing of each animation. So what we're doing is basically we're pretty much going to be constantly emitting fluid throughout the simulation, but what we're going to be doing is switching on and off different colliders. So for the first collider, I'm going to go from the start frame of 1, and I'm going to tick use end frame, and I'm going to put that on 80. For the second one, we're going to want to start on frame 80, or we can kind of like have a bit of fun and have it start on maybe frame 83, because there'll be like a space in between each collider switching on, which means we're going to kind of get a little jet of particles before each one, which is kind of like more interesting, if that makes sense. So I'm going to go 83 to 150, and then oops, I've done that on the on the first one, so let's just go back 1 to 80 on the second one. We want to go the second one, we want to go to 83 to kind of 160, let's say 160, and then 160 we'll go 162, 62, click the end frame, and we'll go 245, let's say 245. So they're on off. So that's cool. So none of these colliders below this top one will be doing anything apart from our shark. So if I just switch off the dolphin and the whale for now, and we'll just unpause the graph, rewind and play, and see what we got. So not a lot going on at the moment. There's a couple of reasons for this. One is that we are not using any initial velocity to be sort of spurting the water up in the air, so really it's just kind of dropping. And 2 is our collider could be set to absolute, so it's more of a tight fit around the object, and we'll just go and do that on all of them. And while I'm here, we're going to turn off bounciness on each collider and friction on each collider, unless we want those attributes, of course, which for this example I'm not using, but you could use stickiness as well if you want your particles to stick to the interior surfaces. So for this fluid, first thing I'm going to do is going to give it some initial speed of 5 in Y. Rewind and play, see if I've got the right Y. There we go. Right, so let's have a look what we've got going on. So we're just going to press play. We can see that that's coming down and it's started to hit the interior shape. It's not a terrible feedback really, that's a lot of particles going on that we're seeing in there. And now we can see that the collider is about to finish working, as you can see. So these guys are all going to drop to the floor, and actually what it's done is just caught some of those particles into the next collider between those gaps that we created, which kind of gives some sort of interest there really. But we shall continue. So we've got that going on, and then so the next things I'm going to start doing is playing around with the viscosity. So I'm just going to go like 0.01. The surface tension, let's go 0.1, and the velo elasticity, to be kind of careful, this 0.05. Just trying to get something that's slightly more sticky, not like MPM gel kind of sticky, but the reason I'm doing this is because I'm going to plug in the other 2 emitters, and they're going to be each emitter's particles are going to be a different color from the next, and I kind of want to be able to see that color split a little bit. Density is quite high on this. I'm going to bring that down to about 500. Okay, so we know that if we go to our final collider, our end frame of that collider is 245, so we might as well make our fluid end frame 240. Let's just go with 240, just so it stops and we haven't got spurts of fluids going everywhere. So now we're going to copy and paste this source, this fluid source. I'm going to put that up there, plug it into sources. So the next thing we want to do is bring in the next emitter. They're over here, so here's our next emitter. I'm just going to plug that in there, and if we just rewind and have a look at our emitters in here, should we just turn the shark off for a second, hit play, we can see that the second emitter is now emitting. If I just go into a different color, yep, and then we're just going to go Control C, Control V here, and I'm just going to plug in the third emitter and plug that source into sources. And now if I rewind and play, we've got all 3 emitters running at once. So before we go too far, I'm going to get some color going in here with these guys, just because I want to see what we're doing. So let's just kill that, pause the graph with Control and period or full stop. So the next thing we want to do from here is to use the separate particle sources node, which you will not have. And if you've watched any previous tutorial walkthrough on here from me, then you would have seen how this is made. But if not, just take a look at this. You can make this yourself. Basically, it takes these 3 sources with an ID for each one. Each one has an ID, but only if you've got label sources switched on in the MPM solver settings. And basically inside here we are taking each source and deleting the other source. Okay, so we've got one source coming in with its source ID, and then it's deleting the other guys, and then this one's coming in and it's deleting that one and that one and that one. And you only really need to make one, and then you can copy and paste and make the other, but we're just bringing in first in array, and then we've got we're getting the geo property point source ID, which goes into array indices. We're going to find all in array integer into remove from array and delete points So we're removing everything else from array, deleting the points from all of these arrays, and then bringing out, and each source is basically like got its own separate output. So what we're going to do is just going to drag in the granular particles into the input of that, and then I'm going to do an assign material. Do 3 of those, Control C, Control V, Control V. Got 3 assigned materials, and I'm going to create a Arnold standard surface material, Arnold standard surface material, and we are going to go Control C, Control V, Control V, and we're going to put one down here, and we'll plug that standard surface into the surface material, and we'll do the same with this one, and we'll do the same with this one as well. So we've got 3 of those guys there, and we're just going to plug our first source into geometry, our second source into geometry, and our third source into geometry. I'll just delete this just to make it neat, and I'm just going to plug this guy in here, this guy in here, this guy in here. Now we can start dealing with colour of our particles. I was using kind of oceany type colours, just some blues and greens and whatnot, just trying to find where it was that I got my colours from. And so we can just colour pick, so I'm just going to colour pick to these colours that I've got off screen. I'm going to do the same with this, like so, and then maybe this one will be darker. So we've got this, that, and that. So there are colours, and that's really the sort of shading side set up for now. What we can do is just kind of neaten this up a little bit. So I'll just collapse these, and this one, and just make everything a little bit neater so it doesn't look as wild. Just pull these over here, and then we could probably just click and drag and right click and put a backdrop in, and we can name that if we want to. And so now if I just replug this in here and unpause the graph, kind of hoping we've got some color going on. There we go. Let's rewind first and play. So we can see all of our different colors going on there, and if we continue to let it play for a bit, we can see they're kind of mixing nicely, and they're going to start creating the shape of our shark, which is really nice. So really the next part is to integrate some of this back into Maya so we can animate certain things, which is kind of the interesting thing about Bifrost. Makes it, we can, you know, pull it away from being fully procedural to being able to kind of art direct it a little bit with keyframes and stuff. So we're going to do that now. And what we're going to be using is, let's just get the input here. Just going to delete that port. We're going to be using the initial speed for each source. Okay, so if I just open up fluid properties, we can see initial speed there. Just going to drag that into the input. So we'll bring initial speed into there as well. Close that, and then this initial speed into there as well. So they're all using the same global initial speed. So now we can see that initial speed of 5 there. So here's where we want to work out just a little bit of timing really. We know that if we look at our collider, our first collider, it runs from start frame of 1 to start frame of 80. And the kind of look we're going for is like a pumping of water. So if we start with, let's say 5, we'll key selected there, and we'll go on to maybe frame 5, key select there as well, and then maybe over 5 frames we'll go up to 15, which is, you know, quite a lot. Key selected, and we'll let that run like that for another 10 frames, key selected, and then maybe we're just going to drop down to like 5, key that, let that sit for a few frames, key that again, And then, so you get a point really. This is, again, it's going to be all personal taste. I would say don't go too mad on the initial speed, but we could like drop down to 0 there. Key selected, come back up to 10. And we just want to kind of get a look where it's sort of pumping around and whatnot. I'm just going to be lazy and copy and move forward a few frames. Paste there, and we go up to frame 80, which was our end frame. So I'll just delete these last two. And what's our final one there? 15. Frame 80, let's bring that down to 1 because we still want a bit of emission happening. So there we go. So if we rewind and play that, we'll start to see we're starting to get some sort of interesting movement going on. Sometimes when there's a lot of velocity going on, you'll see a little bit of slowdown, but you know, it's really not too bad. You can see sort of it kind of makes more of an interesting shape, and as you know, the fact that we're keyframing all of these attributes within Maya just makes it a little bit more easy to art direct in a way. So we're coming up to frame 80. I just want to see what happens there. We're going to see that initial speed drop right down. All of these particles are going to fall to the floor, and I imagine that the dolphin has caught quite a few of those particles below it. Let's just have a little look. We'll do a play blast in a minute. We'll get a better idea of speed and whatnot. But we can see the dolphin is a much smaller character, much smaller object in our scene. But I am going to add a little bit of initial speed because I kind of want to see some sort of swirling going on like within it. But at the moment, it kind of looks cool. So let's kind of stop it there and just sort of think to ourselves, right? Well, now we can carry on animating with the dolphin. We could be like, okay, so initial speed was 1 there, and then we look at the collider. That's 83 to 160. So let's just go. Let's just give it like up to 5. I don't think we want to go mad on the initial speed within the dolphin just because it's so small. Just go back to 2. If you think about that, initial speed does like kind of populate the interior of that volume with particles. So we'll bring that down to 1 again. It's just going to give us some movement. Key selected, and let's just key select that, maybe bring it up to 5 again, key select that, and we're heading towards the section with the whale. Now the dolphin sits partially through the whale, and so some of its particles are going to drop onto the floor, and then some of it's going to be captured within the whale. So we might as well carry on keyframing while we're here. So the start frame of the whale is 162. So let's keyframe this down to 1, and then around 165 we're going to bring that up to 15. Key selected, and the whale is a much bigger beast, as we know. So we're going to keyframe up to 20, and then I'm going to go 0. And then I'm going to drag it along a bit. I might key again, and then I might key up to 20 again. And I kind of like doing this. It's just sort of, I can visualize it as I'm going along. Up to 20 again, and let's keyframe that, and let's bring it down to maybe 5. Like so. Key selected, and let's key select that on 5 for a few frames, bring that up to 20 again. I need to remind myself of the end frame, 245. Key select that 20, and then we'll just bring it down to like 10. Keep that for a few frames. And maybe we'll drop to 5 for a bit. Key selected. Up to 15, key selected, and then let's just give it a big burst up to 20 again. Key selected, and what we're going to do this time is we're just going to do a play blast, see how we're looking, and here we come up to 245. Now we can just, in very like different earlier tests that I've done, I did leave this emitter, this velocity kind of pumping just after the collider fell down, which kind of looked cool. But let's take this down to 0 here, and then still 0 there, and we could just give it like one last 245, one last pump of 5. Yeah, and then bring that down like near 250. It's just a little bit, it would just kind of like spurt into the air, almost as if like, I mean, as we know that whales eject, you know, water out of the top of them. It's kind of, well, not water, it's oxygen, but it's kind of like that, you know, out of its spout. It's kind of like a nod to that, if you will. I'm getting a bit too artistic with this, but there we go. And so we'll just double check that our actual fluids will enable us to do that on their end frame. So they actually finish at 240. So let's just say we want them to finish at 252. Otherwise we're not going to see any difference, are we? 252 and 252, just selecting these fluid nodes here. And I believe it's time for a little play blast. I haven't touched the resolution of this yet at all. We're just like at a standard resolution, so we can up the resolution, but you know, for this play blast. Oh, I've also created a camera. Let me just pause this for a second, and I'll just bring the whale on, and if we just go to the camera, and the camera literally just spins around all of the objects as they change. And I just created that by just, you know, just doing the standard create camera and aim, and with the camera and aim, and basically getting the camera into the area that I wanted it to be. So, you know, like the pivot point there, and then moving the camera to where I wanted it to be, and then animating, putting the pivot point of that onto the camera aim basically, and then just animating around our subject by doing that, and just keyframing this main group. So yeah, let's have a look at it on the whale and the dolphin and the shark. Let's turn the emitter off and we'll have a look at it from this camera. Actually no, we'll look at it from the perspective, because I want to be able to just sort of see what's going on. So let's just give ourselves a bit of a wider angle here. I'm going to stick on anti-aliasing, and let's unpause, and I'm just going to go Windows, Play Blast, just go up to 300, change my render settings to let's go 1080, all good, that's still there already, and I'm just going to hit apply and save my scene first. Hit apply and be back in a sec. Okay, here we are, and we go from the shark to the dolphin into the whale, but we really don't have enough velocity going on in the whale, so I believe we need to amend that. So let's just get back to it here. I just want to double check first that it's not an emitter issue inside the whale, but no, we can see the emitter is fully inside that. So let's just turn these off, but now we know where we're at. We can go to the graph editor instead, the graph editor, and we just go to initial speed, so we can see shark, dolphin, whale. And so I would just say let's grab this one, drag this up here like so, and then maybe we're just going to make those areas of high emission a little bit closer together, and the areas of low emission not to go to 0, and yeah, like so. Let's not have them anything lower than kind of 10, and then these, let's bring this up here, let's have these top out at around 30, something like that. Just bring these up a bit higher. Yeah, cool. So I mean, it was as simple as that, and we'll just run another play blast. So here we go. I think we've done it just by increasing that velocity. So we've gone from the shark to the dolphin here, and then that kind of catches into the collider of the whale, and we've got kind of plenty of fluids going on there. Timing wise, of course, we could spread this out further. We could, get the colliders to last for longer, so that we get to see the characters for a bit longer. But you can sort of see where we're trying to what we're trying to get at, really. You can also see that it's not like extremely water-like. It's got a kind of semi-goo sort of viscosity to it. But anyway, back to the scene. So I just want to talk about briefly this section here. We're separating out the particles, but we don't actually have to do that. I am doing this because I want the flexibility to be able to treat each particle source with a different type of reflectivity, subsurface scattering, or whatever from each material here. But we really don't have to do that. We could, in fact, kill this here, and we could right click on the additional properties of each source and add a color source, and we could do that to each fluid like so, and like so, and then we would pick the colors that we wanted. Let's just for now just pick some random colors. Let's just do this, and then maybe this one will be blue, and this one's going to be, I don't know, yellow. Okay, and then at this end, we could just start typing in reference, particle property reference. We get one of those, and we get an assigned material, and we'll get a standard surface material. We'll plug the standard surface material into the particle property reference and plug that into the surface material, and bring our granular particles out to here, and it would be those guys that would go, it would just be just that would go into the output here. And actually, particle property reference is another node that I created. Then we just go inside. It's actually set geo property. Let's just kill that. So it's set geo property reference is the node we wanted. All I've done just now when you saw that other node is to select all of these and create my own nodes, so I didn't have to do it again. But in here we'd have base color and color written into these options here, and then when we rewind and play, we don't actually see the color show up. Am I in the right mode? Let's just have a look. Let's just call this. So we'll just plug this in here, and there we go. We've got the other colors out. So really, basically, all of this is kind of like everything's baked into one scenario here. With this scenario, we're just going to get all of this as one object, and the colors are only changed via these source properties that are plugged into each source. But later on down the line, if I cache this and maybe I wanted to mesh these points, but only on one source, perhaps only the middle one, I can't do that with this setup here. The fact that I'm separating out the particles into their different sources here means I can do that. But if you only just want to render out just the particles and everything, you're happy with everything having the same shader, the same reflectivity, the same specular or whatever, that's the way to do it. But this way we get, the ability to change what the sources do and also how they look via the separate materials. So let's just unplug that. Plug these guys back in again. Let's just do this. And the next thing we're going to look at is just sort of adding some extra resolution to this, and then we'll cache it and we can render it. So let's just plug that back in there, and we can leave these source particles, these color sources on the fluids if we want to, and we can always plug this back in at a later date. But we have options, which is super cool. So really what I've done is taken down the detail size and the resolution from 0.15 to 0.1. Just put a 0 in here, and that's just given us a lot more particles to play with, and that's kind of where I would be thinking about caching it, or even lower if we were thinking about adding a mesh as well. Now to cache it, I've already cached my simulation out, but let's just break all of this. It's a really good idea to cache, because if you're rendering and your rendering suddenly stops, you've got to start all over again. If it's cached and you start rendering, you only have to go back to that last cache frame and carry on rendering from there. So let's just open up all these assigned materials, and I'll just show you how I would go about caching this. For me, the best way to do it would be to cache it as a Bifrost shape. So I'm just going to start typing in write Bifrost object, and we're going to want to create a file name, which will look something like, I don't know, we'll just call it fluids dot, and then we want 4 hashes, 1 2 3 4, because it's going to be an image sequence, and we would leave it like that. And so I'd hit save there, so we can see it's going to be fluids dot and then image sequence dot bob. So we've got one there, and then for that to animate over a certain amount of frames, we need to stick in some time. So I'm just going to get a time node, and this time node, these frames are a float and they won't plug into this long value, so we're just going to start typing 2, and we want a 2 long node. So we're just going to take frame into 2 long into frame, and then we have that there. And then in properties, we kind of don't want to cache out everything. When we're dealing with MPM, we've got all of these attributes that will cache out: density, viscosity, tension, all of that, and they're all going to make our data more weighty. So in the properties, I would probably just go with point underscore velocity, and then we'll do a space, and I'd go point underscore size, and a space, and I would go point underscore position. And for me, that would be it. That's all I would do. I would make sure that your frame range is set to the range that you want to cache to. So let's say you want to go to frame 350. Also make sure that your timeline is set to just play once, not to loop. Okay, so that would be that. But what we'll do here is, I'm just going to copy this. Actually, no, let's just Control C, Control V, all of that, because I'm going to do 3 lots of this. Control V, like so. And then on this one, I'm going to copy all of this. We'll see. And actually didn't need to do that because it copied over. I wasn't sure. So I would say fluids underscore, source 2, and then fluids underscore source 3, and you could do number 1 if you wanted to. But this is all ready to write now. Okay, so we would just rewind, save your scene, and then just plug these guys in. 1 2 3. Now these will all cache concurrently or at the same time. Okay, you may just want to do one at a time, in which case just plug one in at a time and start caching. But if I just sort of move forward a frame here, 1 frame, and I go to the cache folder, and we just go to date modified, we can see that they are there. So we've got fluids, and then we've got fluids 2 and fluids 3. And then once this all cached out and you're happy with it, let's just cut this. We've just had the write bob, so we're going to have the read Bifrost object come in. And again, you're going to need to have time associated with it, so we could just grab this guy and put it there, which is great. And we'll just go Control C, Control V, Control C, Control V, and on this one we can just copy, Control C, and paste the file name, the written file name, because we know that's how it is. We want this one for that one. Paste this one for that one. Paste. And from that point on, really, we don't, the simulation's not applicable anymore, but we can just grab all of these guys, Control Z, come over here, Control V. These are going to be our materials. And what I will actually do is, if I just source in one that I made earlier, so I'll just go first, and then I've got a second in here as well, second, and a third. So these will be the same as your written ones. We want to put in an Arnold. We could use an set Arnold point settings. So plug that into there, that into there. Control C, Control V. We'll plug that into there, that into there. Control V. Plug that into there, and that into there. So now we've got our particles that are being read, and I'll just put an output down here, making sure that I've switched off the everything else. And so now we could just start to pull these guys into the outputs, and we can see that everything's turning up as it should do. Now all the particles, we just go to a different frame. And what I should mention is that you need to, I can't just copy and paste the name in there, I need to put in the hashes for each one because it's an image sequence. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we can see our shark from earlier. We can see the points working on it, and all I did was this. It was just did an Arnold Skydome light, put HDRI in it, and rendered it, and we can see that everything works really nicely. Now that it's cached, we can just scrub backwards and forwards, and we can do what we want from here because we've got points. There's a lot we can do. We could mesh this if we wanted to. So if I just go into one of my earlier scenes, we can see that we could mesh these particles as well if we wanted to. We could just do from the cache, we could do a points to volume, change some of the detail size in there. I've gone over this in a different walkthrough of the muffin walkthrough, the cake walkthrough. We could do a points to volume, we can smooth the voxel properties, and then a volume to mesh, and then output to the assigned material. I'm not going to go through that now. That's kind of an extra thing that you can do, but it it kind of can look cool just to have a mix. With this is meshed, and then this is the particle version underneath. But you could have both on at the same time. There's a mask between them, offset them, just so you've got. Here I've got the particles showing up first, which is kind of a cool look. So we've got both going on at the same time, liquid and particles, or you might just want the particles. But as I said before, separating out those sources gives you options to be able to do this kind of thing. And that's it. Again, power of Bifrost. I can't say it enough. Absolutely incredible. The amount of particles that you can get going are incredible, and we could do this with sand, and we could do this with snow as well. Obviously fluids, we've got that nice kind of watery look to it straight away. Yeah, incredible. Take care.